Hi, Rick Hansen here with Amazing Greats Podcast number 16. As a fallen away Catholic, I reconnected with the church in a large part because of the music that was being played at the Sunday service. It was performed by a full rock style band doing songs with catchy melodies and solid musical lyrics and hook. But I later found out that that is what Christian radio was all about. So this week I connected with the nation's #1 Christian music radio research consultant to take a deeper dive into Christian music and Christian radio. So who is this Mark Ramsey? Mark Ramsey, to a lot of our audience, probably not a familiar name, but once we start talking about it, they're going to understand how important it is that you are here with us to kind of explain the whole Christian radio, contemporary Christian music thing. Mark is a veteran media strategist. He's a researcher. He's a trend maker. He's also on the board of the Broadcast Film Critics Association. And then, Mark, when I called up your LinkedIn, I have like 2 pages of stuff that Mark Ramsey is, and it was unbelievable. So you got podcasts, you've got 2 books. Tell me, what keeps you busy these days?
What keeps me busy is doing good work for my clients and doing good work, I hope, for my family.
There you go. So your clients, so what kind of, so you work with media companies for the most part?
Yeah,
right?
I work with media companies, especially broadcasters, and not counting the podcast stuff.
Gotcha. And you also have a podcast on top of it all, right?
Well, we do. I've done a bunch of work in podcasts. Right now, we've got one about to come out with some great people in it. David Harbour's in it. Jeffrey Dean Morgan's in it. Full cast production, written and directed by Sarah Wayne Callies, who's also in it. She's from The Walking Dead, and that comes out at the end of this month.
Very cool. Well, what struck me as interesting and kind of exciting is that you also end up being, I would say, unless you can steer me in another direction, probably the most go-to guy for consulting Christian broadcast companies. You have a newsletter called Faith Bright, and you must have lots of Christian radio clients. Is that correct as well?
Yeah, I think probably, I can't be sure of this because who keeps track of these things, but probably I do more research work for Christian broadcasters than Christian radio broadcasters than anybody else does, both commercial and non-commercial. But it's not really consulting per se because it's not programming consulting. It has to do more with how to grow the audience, how to deliver to the audience, how to track the audience's needs, how to provide service to that audience.
Yeah. And because you and I are both kind of radio guys, and our audience is not, so we're gonna have to be cautious that we don't dip too deep into the vernacular of the industry, but talk to an audience that is just kind of interested because they're listeners, basically. So Let's start with the history of contemporary Christian radio. It's a fairly new phenomenon. Is that right?
Yes, I don't know that I'm an expert on its history. I'm an expert on its recent history, I guess.
Okay.
But I've been doing work for those stations for probably the last 10 years or so. And over time, the audience keeps steadily growing. And it's been really heartwarming to see, I think, as the number of stations grow. These stations, many of them are non-commercial, so they're supported by listeners, by fans. That's the thing right now, right? Everything is supported by its fans.
Yeah.
Whether you're talking about a Netflix subscription or a Patreon member relationship or, I don't know. Now all the over-the-top services are by subscription. So they're all supported by fans.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
So now that's the thing. So you have a radio station that's supported by fans. You say, well, there's nothing new about that. That's as old as NPR and non-commercial radio, and that's true. But show me the other music-driven format supported by a large number of fans. That leaves out classical. Many more fans for Christian music than for classical. So there isn't one. I mean, really, it's the only mainstream, broad-based, fan-supported music radio station, radio format that there is.
Well, jumping back, so I think there was a touch into contemporary Christian music back even as early as the 70s and 80s, but it was very spotty, and there were no real radio stations that were making an impact. You had acts like Amy Grant and Michael W. Smith, and those are the origin bands or origin artists of the time. And it seems like the 90s were the explosion of contemporary Christian radio, and that's kind of where you came to be a part of it, right? It's in mostly the 90s and on into the 2000s.
Probably more in the 2000s, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was already a growing phenomenon back then, and K-Love obviously was a lot smaller than it is now. Air One was a lot smaller, if they were even around then, I don't know. Yeah. But yeah, it's been wonderful to watch it grow. The audience grows every year, even still, I think probably because of the number of stations grow. And every time a bell rings, an angel gets its wings. I'm told.
So why is that? What is it about contemporary Christian radio that is growing an audience in broadcast, where a lot of other stations and a lot of other formats are not? They're struggling with that.
Well, first of all, it's fairly unique. It's fairly exclusive. The songs don't appear on other stations or other formats to any great degree, so they kind of own their format category. The category is big enough for one or two stations in most markets. It's not really big enough for three or more like country is in some southern markets. So it's able to kind of exist like a really popular island, that you pass by on a cruise ship and say, wow, I want to stop there. That's one reason. I think the other reason is that unlike most popular music formats, which are kind of hit-based, song-based, hook-based, Christian music is largely values-based.
Interesting.
It's largely about, the lyrics. It's more about the lyrics for Christian than for any other format I can think of. Because the lyrics, people do pay attention to the lyrics. They sing along all formats, but when they sing along to a Christian song, you're singing along to something that's about, making you a better person, bringing you closer to God, making your life better, giving you hope, uplifting you, refreshing you, changing the way you see the world and making your world a better place in it. Those are all incredibly attractive values, and you're not going to get those values from the top 40 station. You're not going to get them from, any other format, really. You're certainly not going to get them from other non-commercial formats like public radio. It's really unique to Christian.
Yeah, it's almost like when you're listening to a contemporary Christian radio station, it's almost like a prayer set to music, right? It
is, and I think one of the reasons why the smart Christian stations don't put Christian on their, above the headline. Christian's not how they advertise themselves or promote themselves. It's not what they go out to potential listeners with, because for some people they have impressions about what it means to be a Christian station. It's going to be preachy, or it's going to be, old school church music, or whatever those impressions happen to be. Sometimes they're positive, sometimes they're not. But there's no reason to use those, to use that term even in promoting yourself, because once people listen, they discover and appreciate what the station is, and the term, rather than becoming an obstacle, becomes an attractant.
If I were to start a Christian music station right now, as a consultant, as a researcher, as a knowledgeable person in the industry, what are the ingredients that I would want to make sure that are a part of my radio package, if you will?
Well, you certainly want to play the music that people are listening to today. Playing popular music in the category is key, playing the popular artist in the category is key. You would certainly want to have personalities that connected with people on a personal level. You'd want to have storytellers. You'd want to have real people, authentic human beings behind the microphones. There's the value of any personality is the fact that there is a personality there. I don't mean a talent. I mean a personality, an actual personality with 3 dimensions. That needs to come through the speakers or the earbuds or whatever it happens to be. And those people don't grow on trees. So you've got to have the right talent. You've got to have people to connect. They don't necessarily need to be around the corner. That may or may not be helpful. But they certainly need to know how to connect. At the end of the day, we're all human, whether we live here, there, or anywhere. So connecting is more important than being local.
Just a quick, my background was I was raised a Catholic. And so when you went to church at a Catholic church, it was, especially back in the day when I went, it was all about hymns and choirs and organs. And there was musically nothing relevant or hip or contemporary about it. Then I kind of drifted away from from church altogether for a number of years, kind of brought back into the fold as my son came back from Christian camp and wanted to be engaged in church. And then I walked into a new church, not a Catholic church, but a new contemporary church. And the thing that struck me was on stage is a 6-man band. They're playing, they've got drums, they got electric guitars, and it is a very rhythmic, melodic music. It was the hits with a different lyric. And so for me, as a radio guy and a music guy, that was the attraction. I mean, that's what brought me in the door. And then all of the other things about being at a church came into play. But that the whole music thing was the attraction. So the question is in this day and age, what I've noticed is that the hits, unlike on a top 40 radio station, last a long time. Not forever, but a long time. What is it about Christian music that doesn't, that keeps it not moving up the charts and down the charts and all of that? Is it that there's not enough research to know, or?
Well, I think part of the reason is that it's a format built on fans, not, I don't want to use jargon, not reach, not the largest number of possible listeners. Instead, it's built on a moderate number of strong fans. So when you have fans, you have relationships with artists and relationships with songs, and it's less about the faddish nature of the music or the song, and more about, the steady diet of music you like. So it is more in common with, more adult, so-called adult-oriented stations than a top 40, which is more of a youth-oriented station, where everything, boyfriends, girlfriends, and hits turn over quickly for that demo.
Yeah.
So yes, it's less about dating and more about a relationship.
And is there actual data on a week-to-week basis that says, oh, this one's more popular than that one? Is there sales data, or is there a call-out kind of research that's being done?
Well, Christian broadcasters have access to the same tools and resources as every other format. So they know what sells, they know what people are requesting, they know what the Spotify charts reveal, and they know what their own internal testing shows. So they're able to weave all that together and come out with a compelling blend.
Is there any way to track what churches are playing on Sunday mornings?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer. That would be interesting. I'm not sure how much that would sway what Christian broadcasters play on a day-to-day basis, since, when you're in a church on a Sunday morning, you're there for a specific thing on a specific day at a specific time. That may not be what you want Monday morning or Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah.
So, you have to these formats are created for always on purposes, not for, the situational purpose that you find yourself in a church for. That's, I think, one of the things that good Christian broadcasters realize, that quote unquote church music per se gives you a sense of what people want when they're in a church. It doesn't necessarily tell you what they want when they're driving around town.
Yeah, and I've noticed even in my experiences that you were earlier on talking about the fact that these are just uplifting songs. They're not necessarily all worship songs per se, but they kind of tell a great story. It's a great story about a relationship. It's a great story about like any song would be.
Some of them are story
more praise and worship oriented.
Well, also I think some of them are just kind of statements of principle. This is something happened to me, and this is how it affected me, or here's how I cope with a problem, and they're just kind of declarations of principle, and those are reinforcing and encouraging for people who need it. I think people. I've heard people say they get in a car, they get behind the wheel, the traffic's bad, they get frustrated, they drive crazy, and then they flip on the Christian station, and it calms them down. It calms them because it reminds them there's something bigger than this traffic, and this commute is not the end all and be all, and this moment will pass, and there's a bigger reason to be alive than this. And those are all important kind of universal messages, and they're not messages you're going to get from most formats.
Well, what amazes me too is that there's this huge number of artists in the contemporary Christian field now. Where back in the old, in the original days, there was a handful, and now it seems like every week there's somebody popping on the contemporary Christian charts and making big waves. I was making a quick list, and it's like the list goes on and on. It's Chris Tomlin and Danny Goki and Toby Mac and Phil Wickham and Jeremy Camp and Lauren Daigle and King Country and Big Daddy Weave and Matthew West and all of those. And now some, not a lot, but some cross over into secular radio. Lauren Daigle is probably the most obvious example of that, but Mercy Me had a song. Do you see that happening more? Or not really? Is that a trend?
It's hard to say, because what crosses over has to do with lots of variables that are, it's tough to predict. I mean, you can't predict the hits, let alone predict what's going to cross over in other formats. I think increasingly nowadays it doesn't really matter what crosses over, because now we have access to Spotify, where every individual who has an account over there can create their own custom playlist with their own list of songs, some of which may be listened to by a handful of people in the world. And so what does it mean to cross over in a world where people can pick their own songs independent of genre? Yeah. What does that even mean? It's almost kind of an academic problem that's now remote from the average listener's field of view, because they don't have to worry about it anymore. They have Spotify, they have Pandora, they have SiriusXM, and they have their local radio station.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. And maybe what I should do, because I use the term first, is the term crossover, mainly meaning that it goes from a Christian format only and jumps over to maybe an adult contemporary station or a top 40 station or a country station. Mm-hmm. So that, just to explain that, what are some of the unique challenges going forward for contemporary Christian radio stations to keep growing that audience? Are there things that remain challenges for them?
Many of them are non-commercial, and when you're non-commercial, you have built-in challenges. When you're supported by listeners, supported by donors in particular, that's a small percentage of your audience contributing a vast percentage of your revenue. And that's a tough equation, because you have to count on that giving sustaining and growing. And maybe it will, maybe it won't. It depends on, the way you ask, how you ask, what you offer, all that stuff. Yeah. So I think one of the challenges is going to be financial support in the future. That said, in many cases, I'd rather be a non-commercial listener-supported station than an advertising-supported station, because that pool of money is even more volatile and likely to erode
Yeah.
than is the pool associated with people who give to something they care about.
What about just, I wanted to touch on the technique of fundraising. Is there, based on research or based on clients that you know and work with, are there ways, better ways to generate revenue than others? Are there any keys to that?
Well, there's no magic to it, certainly. I think that typically these stations are generating money in fairly traditional ways. They do share-a-thons or fund drives where people call in and make their pledges. I mean, that's as traditional as it gets. Mm-hmm. Now they have the ability to reach people by text. They have the ability to reach people by email, snail mail, even social media. There are mechanisms now through social media where you can support a station. There are mechanisms through social media that very few stations use, by the way, that allow you to establish your own mini fund drive for the station that you care about, so that you can, through your own circle of friends, encourage them to give on your behalf to that radio station. And that's a big development made possible by social media. It's crowdfunding or peer-to-peer fundraising, whatever you want to term it. Yeah. So there is new development out there, but fundamentally, it's only a question of kind of how you ask, what the ask is, what you're giving in return, and what you expect. I also think that there's a move in the direction of away from purely a pure donation and towards what I like to call membership. When you consider membership and subscription are very similar, right? When you give, you don't give a year's worth of money typically to Netflix. You give it once a month because every month they come back again. Every month you're evaluating the equation. You do the same with your cable provider if you have a cable. And I think that subscription process is an opportunity for Christian stations, because if I'm going to because I could give every month or I could give a one time, but that's different from subscribing, because when you subscribe you get something in return, something that others who don't subscribe don't get. That's the key thing. Mm-hmm. Donors are supporting a station because they feel it's the right thing to do. They feel in their heart they want to. They're doing it in spite of the fact that 96% of the audience doesn't do it. Mm. That's an important and appreciated motivation, but it's not the only way to support the brand. And I submit that a lot of the people who are not donating, a lot of the free riders, so-called, would be happy to give money to their favorite radio station if they were getting something in return that others weren't getting. That's how it works for Patreon. That's how it works for Kickstarter. That's how it works for Netflix.
Are stations doing that now? I mean, and the big networks, are they leaning that way?
Not yet in a big way. No, I'm not seeing that yet in a big way, but I think it's one of the things that's going to happen in the near future, because it's just everywhere. You can't not see it. I mean, there are podcasts that are producing 6 figures of revenue per year doing exactly that. How can you look the other way at that?
This is very enlightening, and I really appreciate you taking the time out. I know you're a busy guy and you're remodeling your home, and you've moved to Portland, up to the great Pacific Northwest, which is exciting. We were just talking today over coffee about what a wonderful place we live, because we don't have a drought, and we don't have windstorms, and we don't have hurricanes, and it's just a wonderful place to be. So welcome to the Northwest.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time today. This is very enlightening, and I know our audience will love it. And God bless you. Thanks.
Thank you. God bless you. I appreciate it.
Well, now 8 months into the Amazing Greats podcast project, I want to take a moment to thank all of our wonderful guests so far, our volunteer production guru and editor, Clem Daniels, our hosts, Joe Michaels, Greg Cook, Larry Lomax, and others, and Clem too, for their support and talents. And a big thank you to my friend and my mentor, George Tolles. Well, until next time, God bless.